All right, good morning. Welcome everyone to our panel, 5D. So this is implementing data review at your journal, policies, practicalities, perspectives. I'm Todd Vision. I'm at UNC Chapel Hill and one of the board members of Dryad. So the idea behind this panel is to increase transparency and rigor. Many journals and publishers have implemented data policies to ensure availability of data behind publications. If you've attended any of the other data sessions at this conference, you've probably heard a lot about FAIR, findable, accessible. It's relatively easy to achieve, or at least it's a technical problem to achieve it. Interoperable, possibly as well, but reproducible or reusable is a lot harder. And so different disciplines have championed sort of different standards or approaches to the R version. In some fields we hear about replication, in some fields we hear about reproducibility, and others we just hear about data review. And we've also seen in recent years the advent of many data journals that have implemented various kinds of data review. And so we thought it was a good time to take stock of what these pioneers have been doing in the field and to see what can be, what the state of the art is and what lessons have been learned from those that can be brought to bear on journals that are of wider scope that aren't necessarily data journals. So we wanted to bring together a few different perspectives here. So we have publisher perspective, a few repository representatives from different disciplines, and ask how data review is being implemented and what are the challenges and what are the opportunities for incorporating data review as part of a data policy at a journal or a publisher. So we won't be focusing on issues that are commonly talked about in other sort of data policy sessions, such as the DOIs or the kinds of checks that are done for data availability statements and so on, but really focusing on the quality control aspects. So without further ado, I'll describe our four speakers and then I'll introduce the first. So first will be Elizabeth Hull from Dryad. She's the operations manager there. Very good, thank you. Then Grace Baines, who's the director of data and new product development and open research at Springer Nature. Then Carrie Gross, who's a professor of medicine and epidemiology at Yale and one of the leaders of the YODA project. And then Sonia Barbosa, who's the manager of data curation for the IQSS Dataverse and the Murray Archives at Harvard. And our speakers will be sitting down here so they can see each other's presentations, which may be a little different than other panels, but we'll all come up and there should be plenty of time for a Q&A at the end. And hope you'll all participate in that discussion. All right, so without further ado, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Todd. Good morning. I just noticed a typo on my slide, so I'm actually presenting this 1 year in the future, which is pretty cool. So just to sort of introduce the team that is involved in the project that I'm going to talk about. This is a collaboration between the Odum Institute for Social Science Research at UNC and Dryad, who I work for, where I work. So Mandy Gooch and Tumai Christian at the Odum Institute deserve a lot of the credit for the work that's been done so far and for putting together this presentation. And Todd is also on the project as a PI of the grant that we received from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. So just to sort of introduce the concept that I think we are all addressing today, open access to scientific findings is of limited value if there is not also access to well-documented research data and accompanying an analysis code. And without certifying that the data and code that underpin the literature are not only available, but meet community-accepted quality standards, data that are accessible are incomplete or not usable. So scholarly publishers, such as yourselves, journal editors in particular, have a lot of power to influence norms of research practice and to increase transparency through data sharing nudge policies, which require authors to publish underlying data and code. However, very few journals have adopted such policies, and even fewer subject the data and code to any sort of verification or review process. So our group asked ourselves, what can we do to help encourage better journal practice? And we sort of realized that we were uniquely positioned to help identify the most effective and efficient methods for implementing data policies that incorporate data review and publication. For one thing, the Odom Institute specializes in social science research, as I mentioned, and they work with 2 political science journals to provide independent verification of analyses that are published in those journals. I won't say too much about that because I think Sonia is going to address it in her talk. Anyway, they're sort of doing the gold standard of what could be done in this area. Dryad is a general purpose data repository. Our content is largely in science and medicine, so sort of complementary to what the Odom Institute does. And we have partnerships with a number of journals, including PLOS One, Systematic Biology, Gesundheit, Royal Society journals, that are set up to allow review of data in Dryad alongside the manuscript prior to publication. So these journals are using sort of a wide variety of workflows and requirements for data verification. So we recognize that together our groups sort of had knowledge of policies and practices in a variety of disciplines and at varying levels of stringency. And last year we got funding from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation to conduct a research project entitled Increasing the Value of Open Access Through Open Data Publication Policies. This project is still ongoing, but it involves surveys, policy content analysis, and interviews. And I will talk a little bit more about each of those. So we have surveyed editors of 250 top journals in biology, health, and social sciences. This survey was designed to identify journals that have robust data policy and get some information about how the policy is presented, whether or not it's enforced, and some of the challenges and successes of the policies. So out of those that responded, we identified 54 journals where the editors indicated that the journal had a policy that had a data sharing and or data verification component. So we also then surveyed the authors of those 54 journals. The author survey instrument was sort of aimed to get at the same stuff, but from the author perspective. So are authors aware of the data policy? Do they understand it? What challenges do they encounter when complying with the policy? And for those authors that had also served as reviewers, we asked them some additional questions. And then the policy language analysis. We also wanted to see whether editors and authors' understanding of the policy matched the actual language of the policy itself. So we had some coders do independent analysis of policies, manually reviewing the policy text and identifying terms, et cetera. Oops, skip that. And since our project centers on workflow, we do also plan on conducting interviews with editors, authors, and reviewers of data journals. Since data journals presumably have a data verification workflow in place, we wanted to ask them questions about roles, responsibilities, systems, other workflow elements to give us insight into the sort of practical logistics of data policy implementation. And we have 24 of those identified, and we plan on doing those by the end of the summer. So at this point, I can share with you some sort of early insights that we've gleaned from the work we've done so far. One interesting insight came out of our comparison of responses to the survey questions with the data policy review that we conducted. We asked editors whether or not their journal's data policy required authors to do any or all of the following: submit data to a repository, submit analysis code, or submit research materials to a repository. We then asked authors a similar question: did they understand that the policy required them to do those things? And we looked ourselves at the corresponding journal's policy and determined whether or not it included language indicating those requirements. And you can see here that we aligned those with the Center for Open Science's Transparency and Openness Promotion Guidelines, or the TOP guidelines, looking to see if the policies fell into top level 2 or 3. So if we look at a comparison of those 3 elements that I just described, we see some discrepancies. When it comes to requiring authors to submit their data to a trusted repository, which is the first graph there. I don't know if you can really see the differences in colors there, but the far left is the policy, the middle one is the editor, and the right one is the author. So when it comes to submitting data, it seems that editors and authors, everybody is pretty much on the same page, that first graph there. They also weren't too far off when it came to research materials transparency requirement, which is the far right. Though this graph does show that there were more cases in which the policy indicated a research materials sharing requirement than what editors and authors thought was in place. But if you look at the middle graph, correspondence in the understanding of the policy's requirements to share analysis code, editors and authors, and editors to a significant degree, understood there to be a code sharing requirement when in fact that was not stated anywhere in the policy. Another finding of note came from an open-ended question that we asked editors about strategies and mechanisms that contributed to the success of data policy implementation. And we found a recurring theme here that touches on the necessity of developing and issuing these types of policies in the context of the community. So a lot of editors expressed that their policies worked because of community engagement, consensus, acceptance, buy-in, consulting with the community when developing the policy. And then this is just sort of a nice note that any editors who might be hesitant to issue a robust data policy should be encouraged by these responses from authors, the majority of whom did not find sharing data code or materials to be challenging. I think previous studies had sort of indicated another trend, but our results showed pretty clearly that it's not a big issue. So we're still in the process of analyzing our data, and we still have to complete the interviews, as I mentioned, with data journals. And once that is complete, we will be developing a model for data policy implementation. The model will include a set of recommendations for developing and presenting a policy. Based on what we've learned so far, these are just some of the topics that we're brainstorming to develop the recommendations around. Obviously, there are some issues with policy awareness and understanding, being consistent. Support and guidance are important. Standard criteria and data quality standards is another big question, sort of varying across disciplines. How do we make that easier? And then working with data repositories such as Dryad or Odom Institute to make this process work as smoothly as possible. After we've interviewed the data journals, we'll also outline workflow examples that minimize burden on editors, reviewers, and authors. To do that, we will need to address roles and responsibilities. So who performs the data verification? Are they at the journal? Are they at the repository? Are they peer reviewers? Who does which piece? What type of expertise should they have? Our examples will need to offer suggestions on how to handle disparate systems used for manuscript review and publication, and systems and software that are needed to run analyses. And the workflows also need to be designed to facilitate the various interactions among the parties involved, editors, reviewers, authors, and data repositories, to include tracking the progress of submissions through the workflow, transfer of files among the parties that are involved, and just sort of general communications. So we know I have a lot of work to do, but the button stopped working. Oh, there we go. Okay. We know we have a lot of work to do, but we are committed to increasing the number of journals that adopt a data policy in order to maximize the availability of quality and reusable research data. Thanks.